The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At daybreak he appeared in the temple again. And as all the people came to him, he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman along who had been caught committing adultery. And making her stand there in full view of everyone, they said to Jesus, "Master, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. And Moses has ordered us in the law to condemn women like this to death by stoning. What have you to say?" They asked him this as a test, looking for something to use against him. But Jesus bent down and started writing on the ground with his finger. As they persisted with their question, he looked up and said, "If there is one of you who has not sinned, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Then he bent down and wrote on the ground again. When they heard this, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, until Jesus was left alone with the woman, who remained standing there. He looked up and said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she replied. "Neither do I condemn you," said Jesus. "Go away and don't sin anymore." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So in today's Gospel, it's a very familiar story of the woman who was caught in adultery. And we find an encounter between the law of Moses and Jesus again. And there is, you would expect that when Jesus will be asked the question, "What do you say about this? This is what Moses has said. What do you say?" You would expect that Jesus is going to speak out and say no, and try to explain the law of Moses to them, or to say, "Please let this woman go," or just to say immediately, "Let him who has never sinned be the one to cast the first stone." But he bent down and he was writing on the ground. And there has been a lot of people trying to suggest, what was Jesus writing? Why did he act that way? Because he's been asked the question, and then he starts to write on the ground. Others say that he was writing the sins of the elders who had brought this woman to him. But there is something very symbolic about Jesus writing on the ground, because he says clearly he was writing on the ground with his finger. And that reminded them of what happens to Moses on Mount Sinai, that God had written the commandments. If you go back to the book of Exodus chapter 31, verse 18, that God had written the law and handed down to Moses with his finger. So it's very symbolic about the law that was given down to Moses, written through God's finger. And now when he's writing on the ground with his finger, he is trying to make them to remember that, but also to know that there is a new law that he who is divine is writing. There is a new law which is now not the law of condemnation, which is not like the law of Moses, which said that you should stone this woman, but now a new law that does not condemn. A law that is going to make you look back into yourself. And if you think about that law, then you remember what the prophet Jeremiah said, where he talked about the new covenant. That word, the new covenant, only appears in the gospel, in the Old Testament, through the prophet Jeremiah chapter 31, where God said that I'm going to make a new covenant with my people, and I would hand them the law. The law would be written in their hearts. It will no longer be on stone tablets. It will not longer be on tablets, but it will be written in their hearts. You will no longer need to teach somebody how to follow the law, because the law would be written in their hearts. And what is this law that is written in the heart? It is the conscience. You no longer need to look at something that is wrong, to look at the law and say, no, this is what the law says, before you judge something. It is in your heart. You know it when it is wrong. You feel it when it is wrong. When something happens, you don't need to say, no, I'm so confused if is this sinful or not. No, the law is written in your heart. And that is why Jesus tells them, let he who has never sinned be the first to cast the first stone. And immediately their conscience is enlightened. They know exactly that they are not worthy to condemn. They get back to that law of the prophet Jeremiah. They think about the new law that Jesus is talking about. The law that does not condemn, but the law that loves. Our conscience, when it begins to speak to us, then we realize that we do not have the power to judge. This is what Jesus means by it is important that you remove first the plank in your eye before removing the splinter in somebody's eyes. So we do not have the authority to judge again, because we have a new law, a law that loves, a law that does not condemn, a law that forgives, a law that does not judge, a law that accepts all and gives chances to people to grow. And this is what Jesus showed us in the gospel of today. When he writes with his finger, he's writing something new for us. And therefore, we do not really need to, when there are, especially in the world today, when people are marching against and saying now we should stand for abortion, or movements, different movements that are coming up, and people trying to fight for justice or saying now this is right, we have a right to do what we want to do. I think the answer to that is that they have the law, they have it written in their hearts, they know what is right, and that is why they will go to the streets to try to oppose the conscience. And we try to sit on our conscience and try to silence it and say what is right is wrong and what is wrong is right. And this is what has been happening, that people have tried even to suppress that law. But the truth of it is that it is written in our hearts and we know it. We know when something is right and when something is wrong. We don't need to be told. You don't need to bring this law and tell Jesus, Jesus, this is what Moses said. What do you say? No, you don't need to confirm that. We know it because God has given us the gift of the conscience. And let us ask, therefore, for the grace that we may not be able to overpower and try to find reason not to follow what the conscience is telling us. Because God has written that law in our hearts. And remember that it is not a law that condemns. It is a law that forgives. It is the law that is merciful. It is the law that is tolerant. It is the law of love.